A lonely wanderer journeying through a desolate world inhabited by strange creatures. Small and silent, you're on the search for 3 souls more powerful than any other. Sound familiar? But wait a moment, which one are we talking about? Hollow Knight or Death's Door? The similarities between both games are unmistakable. Small wanderer, check. Somber world design, yep. A dark thing that needs to be opened with the power of souls, got that. Without a doubt, it was this first impression that got me hooked to try out Death's Door. Even more so as the wait for Silksong seemingly stretches beyond the abyss into a dark void. And I had this written months ago, but it still holds up. The fact that the games resemble each other mostly when it comes to atmosphere, and much less when it comes to the actual gameplay, might have been one of the seeds that sprouted into a lingering sense of disappointment throughout my journey across the monochrome world and its doors of death. Still, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that there was more to it than expectations not met. And that is why in today's chapter, we'll dissect the storytelling conveyed through the level and environment design, as well as the creature lore of one section in each game, and gather the lessons that lie in between. I'm Miriam, and you're watching Game Design Grimoire. Small disclaimer before we start. In this video I will mostly talk about early to mid-game content in regards to locations, items, boss fights and lore, but there will be some late-game info here and there as well. Great, so now that everything is settled, let's pick up our nails, swords and umbrellas and get going. Our quest to find a way out of Green Path begins after we follow Hornet to a long stretch of acid swamp that she traverses without hesitation, but we find ourselves at a loss of skill to follow her any further. As we begin to explore the remaining pathways, we become aware of impaled insect skeletons, which, as we will find out later, are born out of a cultural motive. They are meant to act as a deterrent to show that the independent and reclusive mantises, who have been fighting off creatures from Deep Nest, remain an impenetrable unified front, a message also emphasized by a wooden tablet we find in a crevice on our way, warning us about the tribe's warrior-like nature. After crossing a multitude of acid puddles and pogoing of shrooms for upward traversal, we finally find the Mantis Village. It is situated in the depths of the fungal wastes, a thicket of noxious caverns covered in mushrooms of all sizes, filled with air musty and thick from the spore clouds wafting about. The tribe's structures are crude yet functional. Wooden planks build the main frames, bound together by ropes and rods. Bones are used as decoration and as levers to open doors, and cogwheels hint at a mechanical apparatus working in the background, though their exact role is left to imagination. In the distance, there are some acorn-shaped huts that might be the dwellings of the village's belligerent denizens. A bit further in, we will also find pieces of cloth, not unlike hammocks, that some of the mantis wasps are resting in. And when we finally reach the location that holds the item we need so desperately, we find ourselves in a storage room specifically for mantis claws, of which we gladly snatch one and are now able to climb walls. This is not the end of the night's exploration of the Mantis Village, but let's take a quick break to scrutinize what makes this such a great level. I think the experience of the Mantis' refuge starts quite a bit before we enter it, with the fungal wastes and their narrow corridors. It is a biome not many insects would choose as their habitat, and with the acid it gives off a rather hostile ambience. Heck, if you rested at such a place for too long, I wouldn't be surprised if you started sprouting mushrooms yourself. So this first element is one of level design, the volumes and the layout, but also of set dressing, the visual acids and particle effects. And together with the sound design, this oddly intriguing place comes to life as an imaginary space. What makes the village so believable is what Trent Kanyuga, a concept art veteran who has worked on Diablo, World of Warcraft and League of Legends, just to name a few, describes as the secret sauce of environment design in one of his videos. And this holds true no matter the canvas. How do the people or insects live? Where do they sleep? How do they build their houses? Do they even have houses? What is their level of technology? Does the location have a long-standing tradition, or have they just settled here a short while ago? And so on. Asking and answering these questions is what sets apart a nice-looking backdrop from intricate environmental storytelling that renders a world convincing and alive. With that being said, let's flip the coin and switch universes to our raven-feathered reaper journeying through the Overgrown Ruins. We enter the region through a ropeway, which drops us in front of a huge wooden gate with a tribal figure in its midst. Apart from a giant frog statue, we encounter several other sculptures and carvings of what might be a monkey, as well as stone lanterns that resemble the ones we find in China or Japan in our own world. Not to forget the colossal shrine, which assumes the form of an animal somewhere between a triceratops and a bird. We then enter the forest settlement, a small campsite where a tribe of leafy creatures resides. They seem to worship the being that the gate in the beginning was painted with, judging by the ritual site on the right. Apparently there is also a frog causing them trouble, which led the forest to close off the underpass leading to the next area. And our feathered friend needs to find the Elder's Horn, so she can ask the forest to open it up once more. So we continue through the Overgrown Ruins, the origins of which remain unknown, until we stumble upon the horn, lying where once was the forest tribe's old campsite before they were driven away. No matter how much I tell myself that the level design was well thought out, after all the logic behind the retrieval of the magic horn holds up, the incoherence seeping through the cracks throws me off just enough to prevent real immersion. Who built the ruins? Was it the Frog King? If so, why did he allow the forest tribe to live in his realm for so long, but then decided to go after him after all? If not, why is there a giant frog statue in a part of the forest controlled by the forest tribe? Are they religious? What significance has the stone statue in their camp? Even when we purely look at the level design, there are lots of parts that feel too broad, like the developers blocked out the level and only then started to think about what goes where. It oftentimes felt a bit too clean and staged. It creates an ambience more similar to that of a clearing, rather than an overgrown forest. In the beginning, I thought that the wide layout of this and other levels was perhaps the result of the ruler's size, but then there are too many narrow archways that would prohibit these gargantuans from roaming around. There is nothing wrong per se with using a design philosophy that turns a blind eye to narrative cohesion here and there. If you think of it, no one has ever told us who placed all those blocks in Super Mario levels. But whereas Mario levels don't try to tell a story for the most part, the sheer amount of effort put into the design and execution of the Overgrown Ruins makes it hard not to imagine that there is more to it. And whereas in Hollow Nest, there are a plethora of unique and meaningful places to be found within a biome, thinking of Joni's Repose for instance, I often found myself at places like this one in the World of Death's Door, places that stand out visually, but that's kinda about it. Speaking of guiding the player to peculiar places, even something as banal as signposts can be used to enhance storytelling in spaces. The slicing mechanic in Death's Door is definitely a nice to have. However, making the signposts fit into their environment would have been an even nicer to have, in my opinion. I hope this illustrates the impact that both level design and set dressing can have when it comes to conveying coherent environmental storytelling. The Overgrown Ruins have a stylish ambient design, and there is a narrative to back it up, but it is barebones in its integration, which results in making it fall short for players who place value on this element. Let's move back to Hollow Knight and onto the second topic, creature design and lore. Once we make our way down the village, we meet the Mantis Lords residing on their pedestals, ready to be challenged. They fight with fierce elegance, equipped with lethal spears that make it all too easy to imagine how all of those other creatures ended up as impaled memorials. What is even more interesting, there is a fourth pedestal which has been damaged and is without a lord to throne on it. But as will be revealed much later down the line, it had indeed belonged to a fourth Mantis Lord, one who decided to betray his tribe and settled in an area called the Queen's Gardens, where he succumbed to the infection and where we can still encounter him today. What is more, once we beat their leaders, the entire Mantis tribe offers us its recognition and will not attack without being provoked. From the connection to deepness, to the Mantis' culture and their place within the kingdom and history of Hollow Nest, the Mantis Village tells a profound story that is conveyed both literally and subliminally. Heading back to the swampy lands of Death's Door, the Reaper has to traverse both the Mushroom Dungeon and the Flooded Fortress before facing off with the Frog King. So here's his lore. Oh wait, that's about all the game tells us. There's a bit more background lore regarding the connection of the throne room and the king's newfound armor to Knight Elhanan from the studio's first title, Titan Souls. And indeed, this presumption was confirmed by the developers in a no-clip documentary. So if you haven't seen that one and would like to hear more about the various influences and the overall design philosophy behind Death's Door, I'll leave you a link to the video in the description. It's definitely worth a watch. Still, this kind of lore appears to be more of an Easter egg and a nod to everyone who has played Titan Souls, and less as a means to elaborate on the creature design. Taking creative license is perfectly fine, and this is a good moment to mention that Acid Nerve undeniably came a long way from their previous game, which basically was a single boss rush. And they definitely kept the encounters in Death's Door purposefully on the more comical side, another example of which is the Urn-possessed witch, also known as Grandma. This, together with the rather cute art style, does a great job when it comes to balancing out the darker themes of death and impermanence. Nonetheless, in regards to the Frog King, there's this one grunt who we meet in the beginning of the Mushroom Dungeon, who was imprisoned for not wearing a frog mask in defense of his individuality, and who we later meet again at the stranded sailor's campsite. The fact that we gain more insight into an NPC than into the area's central figure attests to a missed chance to expand on creature lore, or at least the relationship between the Frog King and his retainers. So, what are the key takeaways? Showing how the inhabitants of a place go about their lives, their history, or what cultural customs they have created is what breathes life into a game. It is a subliminal story that makes the world feel convincing and lived in, instead of feeling artificial and staged. Even better, environmental storytelling has us get involved and deduce what exactly our surroundings are showing us. But that's not all. It also shapes the player's understanding of their own identity within the space, framing them as an intruder, a welcome guest, or a hero to rely upon. Environmental storytelling may be less crucial if the focus of a game is very narrow, but when intertwined with a compelling narrative, it is the key to weaving an emotional bond between the player and the world they travel. Boss and creature lore can be seamlessly tied into level and environment design, making it all the more believable even if it is simple. If I can imagine the Mantises defending their settlement, and I witness their pride in showing their martial prowess, it is easy to feel quite a bit proud myself when defeating the Mantis Lords, and seeing the tribe's behavior shift from hostile to hospitable. This is how Hollow Knight manages to conjure up the idea of a desolate kingdom clinging on to life. With the player's imagination being handed many well thought out examples, one cannot avoid pondering on what else might live or have lived in this earthy realm. And while there is a story to be followed and mysteries to be solved in Death's Door, it never reached this level of believability for me. Depending on what you value in a game, environmental storytelling might not even be that important to you. And as mentioned in the beginning, expectations also play a huge part. However, even if that's the case, the two levels we talked about are a great case study to examine two very different degrees of environmental storytelling and how they can influence the experience. Because after all, developers can only ever design indirectly, meaning that they can design the game itself, but not the exact experience that different players will go through. So here we are, we reached the end of this chapter. If you're more on the exploration side of the player spectrum, what is your favorite example of environmental storytelling? A big thanks to everyone who stayed all the way to the end. If you enjoyed the discussion and want to show your support for the channel, give that like button a little push. No cost too great when it's for free. And with that, I'll sign off for today. Catch you in the next one.